Hello students, welcome to the final video of the third module of this course on creative writing. So far we have already discussed in the previous videos about writing poetry, identifying the different varieties of poetry, exploring ideas through poetry, and now finally we are going to discuss poetic devices and also learn how to experiment with them. First of all, let's try and learn what are poetic devices in the first place. Poetic devices, simply put, are literary devices used in poetry. They are tools used by a poet to enhance the musicality, to create imagery, intensify emotions, to add complexity, to enhance the mood, or to emphasize ideas. There are different types of poetic devices, and I think as we discuss some of these devices in the next part of the video, this definition is going to be clearer for you. We are going to discuss some of the most common poetic devices now. The first device that we are going to deal with is assonance. We had already talked about the rhyme, and we have already understood a little bit about rhyme in the first video of this module. Assonance is also one type of rhyme. It is actually one type of what is called the imperfect rhyme. Assonance is nothing but the repetition of identical or similar words, especially in the stressed syllables, in a sequence of nearby words. Let's look at one example from the poem called The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells. What a world of happiness their harmony foretells. If you will notice, the A sound in these lines that I have selected from Poe's poems is repeated throughout. This is an example of assonance. The next device we need to understand is consonance. This is also another type of what is called imperfect rhyme. What happens is consonance is that the final consonant sounds in the rhyme correspond. Let's look at one example. This is from the poem called As Kingfishers Catch Fire by G.M. Hopkins. Stones ring, like each tucked string tells, each hung bells, bow swung finds tongue to fling out its broad name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Again, if you will notice carefully, the ng sound is repeated throughout these lines that I just quoted. We shall next look at the para rhyme, which is also another type of rhyme. What happens in the pare rhyme is the consonant order is repeated, but the vowels become different. It is also known as near rhyme. One example is the poem Strange Meeting by Wilfred Owen. This poem makes use of pare rhyme throughout, but we are just going to look at a few lines as an example. These are the lines. With 1,000 fears that vision's face was grained, yet no blood reached there from the upper ground, and no guns thumped or down the flues made moan. Strange friend, I said, here is no cause to mourn. We shall move on to the next poetic device now. This is run-on lines. Run-on lines are the carrying over of sense and grammatic structure from one verse to a succeeding one for completion. This phenomenon is also known as enjambment, which is borrowed from the French term enjamber, which literally means to run over or to stride over. Let's look at one example. We have taken this example from Paradise Lost by Milton, and we shall look at a few lines to understand enjambment or run-on lines better. These are the lines. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our woe with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seed. As you can see, I have not pause at the end of any line. This is because the sense which is contained in the final part of each line is continued through to the next and so on. So this is where the enjambment occurs. Another poetic device is the caesura. The caesura is a pause or break in the metrical or rhythmic progress of a line of verse. Again, we'll take an example from Paradise Lost. I'll read out the lines first and point out the caesura in these lines. He trusted to have equaled the Most High, if he opposed, and with ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven, and battle proud, with vain attempt. Him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion down, to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent to arms. As you can see, these lines that I have quoted, they also contain run-on lines, which is something we recently discussed. But in the fifth line, there is a pause represented by a full stop. This is where I paused while also reading out, while also reciting the poems. As you can see, here there is a grammatical break, there is a grammatical stop, and also a kind of pause in the thought that is contained in the lines that I just read out. So this is an example of what is called caesura. Let's move on to another poetic device now. This is called personification. Personification is a figure of speech in which an inanimate object or a non-human thing or an abstract concept is treated like a person or endowed with human attributes.
Personification is achieved when human characteristics, such as actions or feelings, are given to non-human things like objects or animals. It is used to make these objects more relatable and is commonly used in poetry. For example, the flowers danced in the wind uses personification to give the flowers the human quality of being able to dance. This creates an image in the reader's mind of flowers moving about gently in the blowing breeze, as though they are dancing. Sometimes we even use personification in our daily speech, when we say things like, "That last piece of cake is calling my name." The cake isn't really calling out someone's name, but this personification of the cake emphasizes that the last piece of cake is very tempting.
Let's look at the following lines from Shelley's Ode to the West Wind as an example. Okay, let us look at one example from Shelley's Ode to the West Wind. These are a few lines that I have quoted from the poem. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. As you can see in these lines, the poet is addressing the west wind, which is a type of wind, which is just an element of nature, as if it has personhood, as if it is a person who can speak and who can understand. So this is an example of personification. At this point, we shall also discuss another device which is related and which is also similar. This is the apostrophe, which actually refers to an address to an absent, imaginary or inanimate person or object, as if they could hear and understand them. So the example that we just discussed from Shelley also contains apostrophe, and it definitely contains personification, as we already pointed out. But we shall also consider another example from the Prelude by William Wordsworth. Let's read out the lines. Ye presences of nature, in the sky and on the earth, ye visions of the hills, and souls of lonely places, can I think a vulgar hope was yours when ye employed such ministry, when ye through many a year, haunting me thus among my boyish sports, on caves and trees, upon the woods and hills, impressed upon all forms the characters of danger or desire, and thus did make the surface of the universal earth with triumph and delight and hope and fear work like a sea. as you will notice, the speaker in this poem is addressing again various elements of nature and speaking to them as if they can listen, as if they can understand his voice, understand his address. Let's move on to the next device. This is the image. The image is a literal representation of an object or sensory experience, to put it simply. Images can be literal, they can also be figurative. The literal image does not imply a meaning beyond the sensory image that it evokes, while the figurative image means more than what it literally implies. Let's try and understand the difference with two examples. The first is from the poem The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws a shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that flies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. In these lines, you can see Poe describing the image of a raven that he can see sitting on the bust, which is put on the door of his house, is visible to him, and he describes this image in quite a lot of detail throughout the poem, which is a haunting image, and the effect is created again with the use of various other devices. But although this is a literal image of a raven, at the same time it also has figurative implications, which you will understand if you read the entire poem. So this is an example where we can see both the literal and figurative use of an image being used in a poem. Now, this image is a fundamental component in poetry, which is also proved by frequent comparisons of poetry to painting. In fact, the poet Semyonides called painting silent poetry. He said that poetry is painting with the gift of speech. Thus, the poetic image, he implies, is like a painting with words and sounds. This art of evoking through words a visual image or object is called Ekphrasis, which is derived from the Greek word for description. In a more specific sense, the term then refers to a vivid, literal description of a work of art. A type of poem, the ekphrastic poem, is a vivid description of a scene, or more commonly, a work of art. Let's take one example to try and understand what is ekphrasis in poetry. This example is from the poem Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats. Let's read out a few lines from the poem first. What men or gods are these? What maiden sloth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Fair youth, beneath the trees thou canst not leave thy song, nor even can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal yet, do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Now this line was inspired by images engraved on an ancient urn that Keats had seen, that he had witnessed in a gallery, and the entire poem undertakes a description of these images and the impressions that they make on the poet's mind. So you can see that this entire poem is inspired by a piece of visual art. And that is why we can say that Keats has employed ekphrastic elements in composing this poem. Okay, now let's move on to the next poetic device. This is the allusion. Allusion is a literary device in which a brief, casual, or passive reference is made to a literary or historical person, place, or event, or to a part or whole of another literary text. The aim of adding an allusion in a text is to use a reference from the reader's memory to evoke an emotional effect. Of course, the reader must have sufficient knowledge of the item being referred to in order to appreciate the association completely. Sometimes, allusions may also be made with ironical intentions by exposing the discrepancy between the matter of the text and the item being referred to. Eliot's The Wasteland makes extensive use of allusions, many of which had to be actually explained through notes attached to the poem. Let's look at the opening lines of this poem as an example of the allusion. This is how the poem opens. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. The allusion that Eliot is making in these opening lines is to the opening lines of another poem by Geoffrey Chaucer, and this was the general prologue to his Canterbury Tales. Let's look at the opening lines from Chaucer's poem and try to understand the allusion that Eliot is making. This is how the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales opens. When April, with his showers sweet, with fruit the drought of March has pierced unto the root, and bathed each vein with liquor, that has power to generate therein and sire the flower, when Zephyr also has, with his sweet breath, quickened again in every holt and heath, the tender shoots and buds, and the young sun into the ram one half his course has run, and many little birds make melody that sleep through all the night with open eye, so nature pricks them on to ramp and rage, and do folk long to go on pilgrimage, and palmers to go seeking out strange strands to distant shrines, well known in sundry lands, and specially from every shire's end of England they to Canterbury went, the holy blessed martyr dead seek, who helped them when they lay so ill and weak. If you will notice carefully, these lines from Chaucer's poem, they carry a happy note, they carry a joyful note. It begins with a description of springtime in England, which has an inspiring effect upon the population of this land, and it inspires them to undertake adventures, to go on journeys. But in contrast, the poem from Eliot that also begins with the description of springtime, of the arrival of springtime, of the arrival of the month of April, but here the mood is one of gloom, the mood is one of despair, the mood is one of passivity and of the absence of any form of inspiration. So he is making this allusion to a poem from an older time in order to compare the current state of the world, the current state of Europe that he is inhabiting, and to also point to the fact that the current world does not hold any inspiration even during the sweetest time of the year, which is the springtime. So this is how allusions work. Sometimes they may try to evoke an ironical effect in the mind of the reader by presenting a contrast within the allusion itself. Next we shall move on to another poetic device, which is the paradox. This is a rhetorical device which makes use of an expression or statement that sounds absurd or logically self-contradictory due to the presence of opposite elements, but it illuminates a deeper truth nevertheless. We are going to take up one example from the poem titled My Heart Leaps Up from William Wordsworth. These are very famous lines, but they contain a paradoxical pronouncement. The line is, "The child is father of the man." In this poem, the poet is claiming that the child who is actually born of man is also father of the man, and this claim is explained, is elaborated on in the rest of the poem. So this line, it contains a paradox, but the truth contained in this otherwise absurd statement can be understood, can be validated from a deeper understanding of the rest of the poem where it is explained. And this fact also has been explained by Wordsworth in several of his other poems. We shall take up one more example. This is from Alexander Pope's An Essay on Men, Epistle 2, where he calls man a great lord of all things, yet a prey to all. So as you can see in this line as well, he combines two opposite elements, and this is how it becomes paradoxical in its content. Next, we shall discuss another device which is closely related to the paradox. This is a figure of speech in which two opposite or contradictory terms are combined together. One example is from Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats, where the poet states that a drowsy numbness pains. So these lines, or this phrase, it suggests an impossible combination. It suggests an impossible sensation of pain and numbness being experienced by one person simultaneously. Again, another example is from Paradise Lost by Milton, where Milton uses this oxymoronic phrase, "darkness visible," to describe the strange visibility conditions of hell. So he is suggesting a kind of visibility which also contains darkness in it. Otherwise, which sounds impossible, which is a combination of contrasting opposing elements, but then these phrases are used in order to achieve a certain kind of effect, or in order to describe a particularly complex kind of sensation or complex kind of idea. Next, we shall move on to another poetic device now. This is the conceit. The conceit is a poetic device that makes a comparison between two very dissimilar or contradictory things through an extended simile or metaphor. In English poetry, we find two types of conceits. The first type is the Petrarchan conceit. The Petrarchan conceit is named after the 14th century Italian poet Petrarch, who frequently used a type of conceit in his love poems. This figure was borrowed by English poets of the 16th century, and it became a regular feature of Renaissance poetry, particularly sonnets. For example, in Spenser's Epithalamion, the speaker states that his beloved's eyes are like sapphires shining bright, her cheeks like apples which the sun hath ruddied, and lips like cherries, charming men to bite. The next type of conceit that we find in English poetry is the metaphysical conceit. The metaphysical conceit again is a rhetorical figure which is regularly found in the metaphysical poetry of the 17th century. These conceits make use of complex, witty, highly intellectual analogies, and they explore diverse areas of knowledge. For example, one famous conceit in John Donne's Valediction Forbidding Morning makes a comparison between the lovers and the feet of a compass. Let's look at the line and identify the conceit. This is how the lines go. If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth, if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run, thy firmness makes my circle just and makes me end where I begun. We shall look at one more example. This is from T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, where Eliot is employing a metaphysical conceit, and he compares the evening to a patient etherized upon a table. Let's look at the lines. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Okay, now we shall move on to another poetic device. This is the hyperbole. The hyperbole is the overstatement or exaggeration of a fact or possibility. For example, in Wordsworth's I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, the speaker states that he saw 10,000 daffodils at a glance, by which he means to suggest an overwhelming vastness of number. Let's read out the exact lines from the poem where this phrase occurs. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. So here the poet does not imply that he saw 10,000 lines, literally 10,000 daffodils, literally, but what he means that he viewed a vast field which was full of thousands or a great number of daffodils. While we are discussing the hyperbole, we shall also discuss a contrasting trope or figure of speech, which is that of understatement, which is also known by the Greek term meiosis, in which something is deliberately presented as being less in magnitude or importance. For example, in To His Coy Mistress, Andrew Marvell calls the grave, I quote, a fine and private place. We shall move on to the next poetic device. This is irony. Irony is a literary device defined by a distance between what is said and what is implied. Both the tropes of hyperbole and understatement that we just discussed above are used for achieving irony. For example, in his poem Ozymandias of Egypt, Shelley first describes the desolate, neglected ruins of a statue and then reads out the inscription that proudly declares that the statue belongs to a mighty king who rules over a mighty empire that surrounds it. Let's look at the precise lines where this description occurs. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. As you will notice, in these lines, the poet is making ironic implications because he is describing a king who proudly declares himself as the king of kings and wants to leave behind a legacy which is now in nothing but ruins. Okay, next we shall look at another device. This is the pun. The pun is a play on words with identical or similar sound but with difference in meaning. Such words are also called homophones. We shall look at the following prose poem by Harriet Mullen to understand the use of the pun. Mullen is punning on the different meanings of the word slip in this poem. This is how the poem goes. Of a girl in white, between the lines, in the spaces where nothing is written, her starched petticoats giving him the slip. Loose lips, a telltale spot where she was kissed and told. Who would believe her lying still between the sheets, the pillowcases, the dirty laundry laundered? Pillow talk show on a leather couch, slips in and out of dreams, without permission, slips out the door. A name adores a Freudian slip. As you will see, the word slip occurs several times in these lines, but every time it implies a very different meaning. Thank you, students. This was the final video of this module. in this discussion of poetic devices, I have not included devices which have already been discussed in the previous 3 videos, and I have only included those devices which we had not discussed already. I hope this module has been helpful for you, and it will inspire you to engage in creative writings on poetry. Thank you.